Yes, front row.
I'd like Representative Amash to talk about how broad you think the support is for your NSA amendment today, and I'd like all of you to say whether you support it or not.
It's very broad, and it's broad because the American people support it. It's overwhelming. When you go back to your district, you hear it from Republicans and Democrats. And it's not a partisan issue. It's about the American people versus the elites in Washington. And what the government is currently doing is collecting the phone records without suspicion of all Americans, every single person in the United States. That's a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. And all my amendment would do would be to return the Patriot Act to its original intent. And I didn't support the Patriot Act, and this is one of the reasons I didn't support it. But it would return the Patriot Act to its original intent, which is to collect the records of people who are actually subject to an investigation under the Patriot Act. That's what people wanted to pass when they passed the Patriot Act. If you ask Jim Sensenbrenner and others, that's what they meant by the language of the Patriot Act. But the secret courts have expanded the meaning of the Patriot Act to allow them to go after everyone's records, and that's wrong.
I'll be voting for that amendment. It's something that I hear a lot in the district. People are alarmed that the government, under Nixon, they saw Nixon going after individuals. Now they're seeing a government go after everybody, and that's raising alarm on both sides of the aisle.
I'll be voting for the amendment, and there's a lot of support back home for it. It's also something interesting that's happening. I think there's a lot of bipartisan work happening in the House. I call it jokingly the wingnut coalition, where you have the right wing and the left wing working together and trying to get things done. And Justin is the chief wingnut now. I think there's a lot of good work being done by both sides of the aisle. I think we want more transparency. I think we want to make sure that our civil liberties are protected. And when you see somebody like Chairman Sensenbrenner, who has spoken up against what the NSA is doing and is saying that if today the Patriot Act went for a vote on the House floor, it would not pass. I think he's right about that, because many of us who were concerned about the Patriot Act before we came to Congress, now we're finding out that our concerns actually have some validation. So I think we're going to continue to work hard on this.
Anyone else care to comment?
Rob, I plan on voting for this amendment as well. A couple things. Congressman Amash and myself and a few others had sent a letter to the administration requesting some answers to some very basic questions to this state. No response. No response. They talk about transparency, and we're still waiting for those questions to be answered. We did receive, I think many of my colleagues, a letter signed by numerous attorneys general and a few other folks in DHS in the past. And if you've seen that letter, the question I ask is, do any of these folks have security clearance today? The answer is no. The answer is no. The ones that know still refuse to answer some really basic questions. And I'll look at this from the perspective not as a member of Congress, but from the perspective of my constituents. They want answers to these questions. But this is a very commonsensical amendment, and the reaction to it is interesting, especially from those who have no access to the very intelligence they claim to be defending and defending the ways in which it's gathered. I think this is a very commonsensical amendment.
A reminder, if you're watching online, to use the hashtag CWC113 if you have a question. And for those of you in the room, if you could identify yourselves and state your outlet, we'd appreciate it. Yes, second row.
Ashley Parker from the New York Times, and my question is to everyone. Yesterday, the House Judiciary...
Oh, okay. I guess
There's a couple of people I think
Did you want to weigh in?
Yeah.
I didn't...
Yes. Yes, I support Justin's amendment. I'm glad he brought it forward. And I think if you look under Justin's amendment, the NSA can still go before the FISA court, but they'd have to prove a case. If they felt that someone was under suspicion of terrorism, they'd have to prove the case. But they can't just go get blanket data on every American who's not even under suspicion. And I think that's the heart of the amendment. I support it.
Ashley Parker from the New York Times.
Can we just get Representative Bachman to say?
I'm Michelle Bogman from Minnesota's 6th Congressional District. I'll be voting no on the Amash Amendment. And the reason why is because with the business records exception, Section 215, there is no expectation of privacy. Individuals do not own the records. The records belong to the company. The records are in the possession and they belong to the phone companies. They are not the individuals. So there is no Fourth Amendment expectation of privacy or right to the business record exception. Regarding the Section 702, that is applicable to foreigners on foreign soil. There is no constitutional right or protections for foreigners who are outside of the United States. So there is no constitutional expectation or right to a warrant. So I will be voting no. I think the tragic irony in all of this is that we had an individual who had taken an oath and swore to uphold the Constitution, and also an individual who, in Snowden, who intentionally chose, by his own volition, to declassify highly sensitive classified information. This was not an act of a patriot. This was an act of a traitor. And I think one of the greatest tragedies is that if we take this program and remove from the United States the distinct advantage that we have versus any other country, it will be those who are seeking to achieve the goals of Islamic Jihad who will benefit by putting the United States at risk, and it will be the United States which will be at risk. Yesterday, General Alexander came and spoke to members of Congress who are interested in hearing about this. He said very clearly what Ed Snowden has done has put the United States at far greater risk than it was before. And if we deny the United States the capability in very quick time, real time, that we need to have in order to be able to find linkages to help us in pursuit, for instance, with what we saw most recently in the tragedy in Boston, then we will put people's lives very much at risk. I believe that we need to win the war on terror. We need to defeat the goals and aims of Islamic Jihad. And for that reason, I will be voting no on the Amash Amendment.
Congressman, I'll give you an upper.
Sure.
Just for the benefit of Congressman Jordan and Congressman Sutherland, the question before us is how you will be voting on Congressman Amash's NSA amendment. And Congressman Amash, do you want to respond to that before they weigh in, or I don't care how we do it, but.
I'll be short. Yes, I'm going to vote for it.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I just want to make sure it's clear. My amendment doesn't touch Section 702. There's a lot of talk about Section 702. You often hear this from proponents of the programs and from opponents of my amendment that 702 has somehow impacted. Section 702 is an entirely different program. And a lot of times when we hear talk of terror plots that were foiled, the advocates of using these programs are talking about Section 702 and are conflating it with Section 215 of the Patriot Act. What I'm referring to in my amendment is Section 215. This is the collection of all Americans' phone records. And all you have to do is go home to your constituents and ask them whether they think they have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their phone records or any of their other records that are stored by any third party, and they will tell you yes. So there are those in the intelligence community and those in the Department of Justice who are relying on a case from the 1970s to justify what they are doing with this current program. That case involved one person who was under suspicion. It was before the computer era, before there were powerful computers to analyze the data, and it only involved tracking this person for the duration of the investigation. That is very different from collecting the phone records of every American, millions of Americans, without any suspicion. It is very different. And if you ask your constituents, you'll find the answer that they think they have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their records. And under the legal reasoning that the intelligence community and others in the government are putting forward, none of your records are private. Nothing, not even your data. Because if they're going to use that legal reasoning that anytime something is stored by a third party, you don't have an expectation of privacy and government can get it, then in the modern era, you have no Fourth Amendment protections. You might as well throw the Fourth Amendment out the window, because most of our papers and effects these days are digital. So we would have no Fourth Amendment protections, and I'm confident that if this issue came before the Supreme Court today, they would distinguish it from the case in the 1970s 100%, and they would say we do have a protection under the Fourth Amendment in our data that is stored by third parties.
If I could just add to that, the records are the property of the business. The business generates the records, the business owns the records. The records are shared with the individual, but the records are the property of the business of the third.
Then that's like saying our emails are the property of Google. So we have a problem if that's going to be our interpretation of the Fourth Amendment.